welcome to The World This Week. I'm Beverley O'Connor. Coming up, Russian forces continue their bombardment of Ukraine, with cities falling and a nuclear plant attacked. More than 1 million people flee the fighting, streaming into neighbouring nations in the swiftest refugee exodus this century. And an investigation is opened into possible war crimes while both sides agree on humanitarian corridors. This week we are focusing on the war in Ukraine, with reports from our correspondents on the ground as well as neighbouring countries on the front lines of the conflict. Across Ukraine, cities continue to come under heavy bombardment, with some falling and a brazen attack on a nuclear plant. Isabella Higgins begins our coverage from Lviv.
A capital under siege. Kyiv still in the sights of the enemy. A train station is bombed where many have just spent their 6th night sheltering. Expectant mothers also moved underground, babies being born in the cellars of the hospital in the city.
I saw, women are giving birth just in here, in a basement, and they were all in blood.
West of Kyiv, an airbase in Zhytomyr was the intended target, but family homes were hit instead. This man appears calm, but he's just lost his wife.
She was the light of my life. She's the best thing that happened to me. But I'm trying to keep myself together because I still have parents and a daughter.
Along with Kyiv, the president says Kharkiv in the northeast is one of Russia's main targets.
Show this to those in Russia.
The country's second largest city, now a ghost town, where at least 21 people were killed in Russian strikes. As Russia targets key Ukrainian regions, it claims it has control of the first major city, Kherson, which Ukraine disputes. The bombing from the air has been relentless, but the ground assault appears to have slowed. The US says a 60-kilometre convoy near the capital has stalled.
We do believe that they have experienced logistics and sustainment challenges that we don't believe they have fully anticipated.
As the West rallies against Russia, so too are its own citizens. But some of those who stand up to Putin are swiftly arrested. This lady is one of thousands to defy police threats in St. Petersburg. And in a stunning reversal, the International Paralympic Committee has banned Russian and Belarusian athletes from competing in Beijing. For Ukrainians, peace seems far away. Families are being torn apart, fathers saying farewell as they stay to fight. In neighbouring countries, compassion has no borders. Here in Berlin, locals offer whatever they can to fleeing Ukrainians. One woman who managed to leave waits nervously for her friend from the same village. They manage to find each other. Even in safe places like Lviv, these air raid sirens are becoming part of daily life. It means throughout the day, people have to run and quickly take cover. A ritual that's become all too familiar for Lilia Romanova and her 2 daughters.
On the second day, the children woke up and made pistols with their Lego to kill the enemy. Our elder daughter doesn't remember dancing anymore. They say they must kill.
Too young to fight, but eager to do their part. Isabella Higgins, ABC News, Lviv.
The United Nations Refugee Agency estimates 1 million people have been displaced inside Ukraine by the invasion, and it's expecting those numbers to continue rising. The ABC's Sean Rubinsztein-Dunlop filed this report from the Medica border crossing into Poland.
Desperate for safety, the young and old are braving exhausting journeys to cross the border from Ukraine. These women lugged whatever they could carry, with loved ones in tow. The trip would normally be a 5-hour drive.
How long did it take to get here, and how did you get here?
4 days. 2 days we travel car, and then we 2 days go to walk to Poland.
And the trek isn't over yet, with kilometres left to find a bus stop on the Polish side of the border. Victoria Vlasova escaped Ukraine with her toddler Daniela, her in-laws, and their 12-year-old pooch Tom.
I left my mother behind at home, and my mother-in-law, my brother, and my sister.
Lena also left behind her son, the father of her grandchild. He was required to stay behind and join the fight against Russian forces as bombings came dangerously close.
Some airstrikes had already started, and there were sirens.
In Poland, people have come from near and far to help the refugees.
When there was war in Georgia, Ukrainians helped us. Now we are helping them in return.
Finally, a bus shows up to take them to shelter with other refugees.
This family's journey is one of 44 million unfolding in and around Ukraine right now. 44 million Ukrainian lives thrown into chaos by the Russian invasion. It's feared millions of people will flee Ukraine. More than 100,000 escaped into Poland yesterday.
Heading into an uncertain future for families and the world alike. Sean Rubinsztein-Dunlop, ABC News at the Medica border crossing.
Well, many Ukrainians have showed courage and defiance in the face of Russian aggression, including children sent far away from their families. Tom Joyner filed this report.
I
only slept 2 or 3 hours last night. I always sleep in my clothes to be ready for the siren. I simply grab my bags and my cat and get downstairs.
It's barely past dawn, and already all the guests at this hotel in central Lviv are wide awake.
It's horrible. You say goodbye to your mum in your thoughts. The siren happens every day, and every day I hope I will still be able to hear her voice on the phone.
Most of the children know that there is a war. Even my nephew, who is 5 years old, she knows what is going on and asking all the time.
As war rages, hundreds of children with special needs have made a long and treacherous journey by night across the country to reach the safety of this school in Lviv.
Most of them do not have parents. They do not have love of the family. So for us, it is very important to help them.
Many of the children are orphans. All were evacuated to the city in secret by Ukrainian authorities from parts of the country's east, now plunged into fighting.
They brought us here because there might be a war. The buses came the next day and picked us up. I'm only scared for my parents, as well as my grandmother. That's all.
Olga Kotovska is in charge of the children's well-being, but the school can only host them for so long, and she doesn't know where they'll go next.
We try not to involve emotionally, because it's something like we are officials and we have to do our job.
As we speak, a citywide siren signals another possible Russian attack. Olga makes her way to cover, while the children are moved to another part of the building.
We have 3 times per day, maybe more even now, sirens that could be some aircraft or maybe some aircraft that coming and could be the risk of air invasion. I think sometimes there are the circumstances and we have to be responsible for the circumstances we are in. We were not prepared for war, but still, I think the situation is somebody have to deal with that the best we can.
I heard sounds of bombs at 6 o'clock in the morning when it happened. My mom woke me up, and after that I started to pack my bags. And when I was packing my bags, I heard that sound, and it was something that I couldn't describe.
At Lviv's central railway station, thousands arrive every day, escaping cities besieged by Russian forces. 21-year-old Anastasia travelled with her brother and parents from Kharkiv in the country's northeast, leaving behind nearly everything that matters to her.
It's very hard. It's horrible. I'm sorry. I want to go home. Now I want just to be safe, me and my family, and that's all. That's everything what I want. Hello.
Her brother, 11-year-old Gleb, hasn't heard from his friends since many of them took shelter in Kharkiv's underground metro tunnels.
School has closed, but I believe it won't break, and I believe my friends will be alive.
Anastasia and her family are headed for Germany, but her heart remains in Ukraine.
I just want to be safe, and that's all. I don't want anything. I want to have a peace in my country, and to have a clear sky in my hometown, and that's all.
Back at the school, Olga Kotovska isn't sure what the future holds for the hundreds of children in her care, or for the rest of the country.
They want some presents, you know. Yeah. It's certainly the first time in my life, and I couldn't believe even the world do nothing. We all thought that diplomacy are stronger, but it's not. So we just hope people of goodwill all around the world that help Ukraine.
Well, the US president has declared Vladimir Putin was wrong and he has no idea of what is coming. Joe Biden used his State of the Union address to stress that the Russian president has underestimated the Ukrainian resistance and international unity. Here's North America correspondent Jade McMillan.
The President of the United States.
Joe Biden's first State of the Union was more than just an address to the American public, but to the world.
6 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated.
Paying tribute to the courage of the Ukrainian people as the country's ambassador to the United States watched on.
Let each of us, if you're able to stand and send an unmistakable signal to the world of Ukraine. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
The president took credit for uniting Western allies in their response to Russia's aggression and announced he was following Europe's lead in blocking Russian flights from American airspace.
He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond. He thought he could divide us at home, but Putin was wrong. We are ready.
That sense of unity was also on display in Geneva. More than 100 diplomats walked out on Russia's foreign minister as he was delivering an address to the UN Human Rights Council.
The arrogant philosophy of the West, based on a sense of superiority and exclusivity, must come to an end.
What Russia did to Ukraine is an attack on the UN.
The United States is vowing that Vladimir Putin will pay a high price for his invasion of Ukraine. But Joe Biden has also acknowledged there'll be a cost at home. The US is leading efforts to release millions of barrels of oil to try to stabilise prices. But the strategy has had little impact so far.
The United States.
Yet another challenge for a president trying to manage domestic economic pressures as war engulfs Europe. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Washington.
Well, for months, President Putin denied he would invade his neighbour. Then he unleashed his forces by land, air and sea on Ukraine, shattering peace in Europe and redefining Russia's sphere of influence.
When Vladimir Putin met Angela Merkel, he knew her weakness. The German Chancellor was afraid of dogs, so Putin whistled in a black Labrador just to intimidate her. Putin is in the intimidation business. He learnt the lessons early. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born on October 7, 1952 in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. His father fought in the Red Army in World War II. His grandfather was a cook for Stalin and Lenin. The young Vladimir eventually studied law and became a spy, joining the KGB, the Soviet intelligence service, in his early 20s. In the 1980s, he served in East Germany and saw the Berlin Wall fall. 2 years later, the Soviet flag was lowered for the last time in Red Square. The Cold War had ended, but Putin's political career was only beginning. He would call the collapse of the Soviet Union the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Not that he pines for a return of communism, but he dreams of restoring Russian glory. Putin was an advisor to the mayor of Leningrad. Later, in the 1990s, he moved to Moscow. New Russian leader Boris Yeltsin promoted him to deputy chief of presidential staff, then the head of the FSB, Russia's spy agency. Yeltsin appointed Putin his successor. By 2000, Yeltsin had resigned and Putin was president. He has been in power ever since, either as president or prime minister. What drives Vladimir Putin? He is the man of action, quick to show off his physique, on horseback, in the snow, ice skating, the black belt in judo. He dreams of Russian glory. He has turned away from Europe, wary of NATO expansion. As more and more nations have joined NATO, he has pushed back. In 2008, he invaded the former Soviet state of Georgia to prop up 2 breakaway provinces. In 2014, he annexed Crimea, redrawing the borders of Europe. At the same time, he has expanded Russia's reach, intervening in the Syrian civil war, propping up the besieged leader Bashar al-Assad. It is said he is consumed with vengeance against the West. He senses his moment, believing the West is weak. He has drawn closer to China, signing a new no-limits pact with Xi Jinping. Vladimir Putin believes he is a great man of history. Now in Ukraine, he seeks to bend the world to his will.
In Russia, central authorities have doubled interest rates as they scramble to contain the fallout from economic sanctions. There remain fears of a run on the banks, but anti-war protesters remain undeterred, despite police arresting thousands of people. Here's Europe correspondent Steve Kinane.
No to war. 3 words that have landed hundreds of people in prison. St. Petersburg, the home city of Vladimir Putin, has become the focal point for anti-war protests across Russia. Anastasia Rodina was one of those arrested.
Russian people don't need this war. We don't want it. I don't know any single person who supports this war. That's why we go on streets. That's why we sign petitions.
Protesting without permission is against the law in Russia. Repeated offences can lead to 5 years in jail. Nikolai Artemenko is currently serving 2 weeks for protesting against the war.
You can be arrested, you can be imprisoned, you can get the penalty, you can be beaten by policemen.
In Moscow, Russians marked the 7th anniversary of the murder of opposition politician Boris Nemtsov. He was gunned down near the Kremlin. He was one of the most prominent critics of President Putin's annexation of Crimea.
We know very well that Boris Nemtsov were alive today, he would be at the forefront of this growing national movement here in Russia against the war in Ukraine, against Putin's aggression on Ukraine. This is not Russia's war.
Even at this commemoration, protesters were carted away. As sanctions start to bite and the economy comes under pressure, these protests could escalate. People have flocked to banks and ATMs to withdraw cash, driven by fear of a crippling blow to their economy. Some wonder whether this war could lead to President Putin's demise.
I'm sure it will. Nobody knows when it happens. This month, this year, or in few years. But for sure, it's the beginning of his end.
That remains to be seen. What can be expected is Vladimir Putin will do all he can to crush these protests. Steve Kinane, ABC News.
And demonstrations against the invasion have continued right across the world, including in London. Anne Barker with this report.
Every day now since Russia invaded Ukraine, there have been big protests in London, but this is the biggest crowd yet. Thousands crammed into Trafalgar Square, many of them members of Ukraine's 40,000-strong community in London. Their anger at Vladimir Putin is palpable.
Together we will win! Together we will win!
It's completely ruined the cities. People die, children die. I have a lot of friends in Ukraine, a lot of relatives.
Anger, sadness, shock. Like, what happened is something that I could never imagine would happen.
The world should act and act immediately. They should stop to help to stop this war, and we're still waiting.
But Russians too have turned out against their own government.
I am here to support Ukrainian people and to protest against this invasion from Russia. I don't support this, and I'm ashamed that my leader of my country actually did that.
There have also been protests outside Russian embassies, not just here in London, but in countries around the world. European nations have stepped up sanctions in recent days to freeze the overseas assets of Russia's central bank and isolate Russia from the global financial system.
Well, the war in Ukraine has left Russia, as we just heard, increasingly isolated, and it's now also facing a widening ban from sport. This includes banning Russian and Belarusian athletes from competing in the Paralympic Games in Beijing.
For decades, the IOC has walked a fine line in the name of political neutrality. But now, Ukrainian athletes have demanded that the IOC take a stand.
Aggressors' countries should not have any right to participate in sports events.
In a statement, the IOC said for the first time it was abandoning its neutrality and recommending that sports don't invite or allow the participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes.
Suspend the Russian and Belarusian athletes and officials from the participation in Paralympic Winter Games in Beijing 2022.
FIFA has gone further, banning the Russian national team from international football, meaning it will likely miss this year's World Cup. Whether the sport boycotts will make any difference beyond symbolism is another question.
Sport is important to Putin, personally and also as a tool for propaganda.
Daniil Medvedev's ascension to the #1 ranking in tennis might have been one of those tools, but now there are calls for a ban on Russian players, which would stop him playing the Grand Slams. And Russia's #1 women's tennis player, Anastasia Palyachenkova, said in a tweet she was opposed to the invasion. "I'm not afraid to clearly state my position. I'm against war and violence," she said. In a country harsh on dissent, those are bold words. David Mark, ABC News.
And that's where we will leave the program. You can always watch the show on iView, and there are more world news and interviews at the ABC's YouTube channel. And do join me on The World weeknights on the ABC News channel. I'm Bev O'Connor. Thanks for your company. Bye-bye.